Hi empaths, welcome back to my channel and back to Journey Through the Tarot. We're going to talk about our week with the Hanged Man. Very intense week. And introducing the Death card. Don't be afraid of the Death card. It brought up some anxiety and fear for me too, but we'll talk about it, right? Let's focus on the Hanged Man and all that rich symbolism. This journey is inspired by Dirty and Divine, A Transformative Journey Through Tarot by Alice B. Grist. And we'll be getting a lot of information from one of my tarot teachers' books, Robert M. Place's The Tarot, History, Symbolism, and Divination. And we'll be working with the Waite-Smith symbolism in the Rider Tarot deck. If you need to pick up any of those items, they're in my Amazon store located in the description of this video. Okay, let's jump in. So let's jump into the Hanged Man. And if your week was anything like mine, congratulations, we made it through. It was a really rough one. It was a dark one. Not that I haven't been through dark times in the past before, and so it wasn't unfamiliar territory. It was rough though, right? I had all kinds of financial stuff come up, and sometimes the Hanged Man is depicted with coins falling out of his pockets, right? To symbolize the loss there. And I had an issue with an overdraft situation in my bank account, and I'm still managing on working with the bank on that one, and it was not just like low funds this week, it was low vitality. But what I realized is that was pushing me to cut back on things that weren't necessities, and even activities that weren't necessary, and things that were contributing to the problem, the issue. And that made me realize that that's why the Hanged Man leads right into the Death card, which is an ending, right? Learning not to trade vitality for money, right? Because my vitality was so low this week. I was suffering a lot over long-term patterning in my family system and things I've been working on healing for a long time. They kind of like I've been chipping away at them, and felt like I really had to dive into them this week. Almost like a rebirth. And as we were talking about the symbolism last time, this can represent someone coming out of the birth canal, but or preparing, right? As the light is shining at the top of the head. And the death card being the rebirth. It got so bad, I was really open to, I even expressed this to a friend. I was like, I'm open to seeing if medication would be right for me. I mean, just to explore my options, because it was a really rough time. And I mean, I have been grappling with some heavy, dark emotions and health issues. So I could see how it was circumstantial. Also, location isn't ideal for me. So, it does feel kind of like a dark time in my life. So I wouldn't want to treat it chemically if that's not the best option for me, but I was open to it. And then I saw a meme on my Instagram timeline or feed or whatever it's called, by Awakened Soul Goddess, and it said, struggle is temporary. Sacrifices are like investments. Give up the short-term comfort for the long-term win. Be patient and stay focused. I even put that on my own Instagram account, urban_empath. And I thought, this is, hello, memes are so powerful sometimes. They come at you at the right time. They're a lot like tarot cards. Very interesting, right? They can be used for divination, inspiration at the exact right time. You need to see it. When I saw that, I was floored that it was so on point for this week, because the Hanged Man's all about sacrifice, right? And short-term struggle for a long-term gain. When I went to the gym this week, it was really crowded. I went kind of late because I was dealing with the banking issue. So I got there late, and I had to park at the church that's right next door. And I never really looked at the name of the church, but it was called the Altoona Alliance Church. And their logo, or whatever you call it, looked a lot like the Hanged Man, the history of the Hanged Man that was depicted, or the Golden Dawn symbol. I don't know if you'll be able to see that there, with the illumination at the bottom and the cross, how the hangman has his leg crossed over, and the crown is like the illumination at the crown down here, which I found very interesting. So I took a picture of it on my way into the gym. And where my healing space is right now, it's called Heart Space Wellness Alliance. So the word alliance comes in again. And I didn't really know that was called the Altoona Alliance Church until I kind of saw that logo, and I was like, what is this church called? So I thought that was interesting. I noticed a lot of energy accumulating at the crown this week, almost like I was hanging upside down. One morning I even woke up and my scalp felt like it was asleep. Like I didn't have a lot of feeling in my scalp. And I found that very interesting. Like even like the sensation of being upside down. And, you know, it is like a perspective shift. So it can be a symbol of that, of like seeing something from another angle or another perspective. Hanging upside down. That's another perspective. I watched a true crime show with my dad. He likes them too. Some of them are edited so that it's not so harsh and intense for my sensitive nature, because I find it interesting, like the psychology and the investigation and putting clues together, because I feel like that's what I do in healing work oftentimes. So I like the investigation part, but I don't really want to explore and look at some of the gory, gruesome details, right? I'm too sensitive for that aspect. So sometimes the 2020 ones on the OWN network are palatable for me. Like I can watch that and it's not too harsh, and it's still interesting enough to think about the psychology and the investigation and how they put clues together to come up with the answer and the solution there. And then there's resolution at the end. I find that formula really pleasing. Like I really like that and enjoy that. I find it entertaining. I was watching the one that my dad had recorded, because he likes watching them too. And it was a two-parter, and he only had the first half saved, and the other half wasn't on there anywhere. And he was like, oh no, okay, we don't get to see the ending of this story because I deleted it or never recorded or something. And so it literally left us hanging in suspension. Hanging in suspension. That was a bit of a stretch, but still applies. And then I was watching on the MTV app, there's a true life crime docuseries, and hosted by Neem from Catfish, which is another show I like, because again, it's like putting clues together. I find that fascinating. But it only has 2 watchable episodes, and they're not like 1 and 2. It's so that's weird. It's like episode 1 and episode 6 or something. And one of them is the Kanika Jenkins case, where she was found in a freezer in a hotel basement. And then the other was about Lissandro Jr. Guzman Feliz, and he was mistaken for a rival gang member and murdered outside of a bodega. They were too intense for me. I felt the residual energy of watching them, because it showed footage, and that's too much for me. Like, that's just too much for my sensitive nature. But experiencing the loss and how, they weren't given the chance to have a full life and to live into old age helps you understand the privilege of doing so, and that and I assumed that was the death card showing up, and I thought it was bleeding in to this week because they do overlap. But I started to think that maybe it's the loss of the hanged man, right? The loss of life. The dying aspect might be the hanged man, as opposed to death, as opposed to the closure. Yeah, they were both very, very sad. And then there's a documentary on Netflix called Don't F with Cats. It's a docu-series. It's 3 episodes on Netflix. And I had heard a lot about it, but I didn't know what it was about. I had no idea. So I started watching it, and again, it's another one of these true crime docuseries, and it's about like a narcissistic sociopathic killer who started with cats, and he made these viral videos, that went viral as people were searching for the suspect, and this small online community was gathering the clues. And then it goes on to say, well, since he was narcissistic, did they add fuel to the fire by giving it attention? And so it just, and then they end with like, why are you watching this, right? Like, see how weird, how crazy we are as a society. Like, why are you watching this? Why are you giving him more attention? So it was just like one of those I want to say the F word, mind F, but again, they showed the footage. They showed footage, not the videos in full, but they did show certain things and were very descriptive of some of the gruesome details, and that was really hard on a sensitive system. So if you know that you're sensitive to that, I don't recommend watching it. I didn't understand how long it would linger with me, but it gave me a lot of anxiety. I had nightmares. I woke up in the middle of the night. And the killer of that series really reminded me of someone I knew in New York City who also was high on the narcissist scale, and so that freaked me out a little bit. I mean, I don't believe he was. I know he didn't murderous. Well, I guess I never know for sure, but I don't believe he had murderous tendencies. So that didn't really. But I did see some sort of violent or abusive tendencies come out, and that's why I ended the connection. But so it just gave me a gross feeling to see someone so similar. And then the night after I watched that, in the wee hours of the morning, I kind of woke up with anxiety, and I just kept feeling that energy of someone like that being here or being in my space, or and so I grappled with the idea of skipping over Death Week because I didn't think I could live with that energy. In all seriousness, in all honesty, I felt like if this is the death card showing up, I don't think I can live with that intensity for a full week. And I don't know that I would ask my viewers to either. So I considered just showing respects to Death Week and then talking about those experiences and then moving on to Temperance. But some other things came up that changed my mind. I also watched a Princess Diana documentary, and then a Freddie Mercury documentary came out after that. So I watched some of that. And again, with the Hanged Man experiencing their loss, right? The loss of their lives. I didn't personally, but I mean, as public figures, we did in a way. And it brought an appreciation of what they gave the world. They were both similar in that they were rebellious and had some royal energy in different ways, right? That expression was different, but that's why it's interesting that they showed up back to back. Like I have autoplay on my YouTube, so it just autoplayed after the Princess Diana documentary. And I hadn't even clicked on that. I think that autoplayed from something too, so it was interesting. And I was very moved by her legacy because, and that's moving into death, right? What, considering our legacy, what are we leaving behind? And I was just really moved by her kindness and grace and love, loving heart, right? It reminded me of Mary Mother's energy, right? That unconditional love. And that's just a religious figure from my childhood, but there are other, certainly deities and things like that carry that expression as well. Other archetypes. They both kind of changed the rules, right? Like she changed, and it was beautiful because it was narrated, I guess, or it was an interview of her. I don't know if his title was royal servant or whatever. He started as, I guess, catering staff, whatever that's called, in Buckingham Palace and serving the Queen herself, and then went on to be with Princess Diana and Prince Charles when they were wed and married. And then in the divorce, she demanded that he come with her, and Prince Charles put up a fight, but he ended up going with her and becoming more like a personal assistant, but also a confidant and a friend. And the way he told her story was really beautiful, and he was the closest person to her in the end. So it was really, really a lovely thing to watch, and it re-inspired me, and it reminded me that loving place, that loving kindness is one of the greatest gifts you can give to the world. So many people are feeling unseen, feeling unheard, and I know that that's what I've certainly been feeling a lack of in my life. Feeling that understanding, or that I'm heard and seen in a way, right? That emotional intimacy that was lacking this week with the Hanged Man. I made a note to myself at the beginning of the week. It was very intense. I felt it already, and I was going to ask my friend, I'm going to tell him, my best friend, I was going to say, I'm going to need you this week. This is a dark one. I can feel it. It's very heavy. And it turned out that, he had company staying with him. And so we never really got to even chat this week. We touched base a few times. But he's one of the main people I rely on for emotional intimacy. I don't have a lot of that here. I did have a lot of that in New York City, and I didn't realize that's what was happening. But when I worked at a holistic center, everyone would come in and share the deepest parts of themselves, and oftentimes would give me the space to do the same, and we would share connection. And while it did weigh heavy sometimes when I wasn't actively wringing out the psychic sponge, it's also very rewarding and fulfilling, and a fulfillment of one of my main needs, right? In a way that is satiating for me. So that's been really lacking. And I think that's one of the ways I feel very malnourished here spiritually. So that helps me acknowledge that can, whatever you're feeling is lacking is a gift you can bring to the world, right? Because you value it. If you can notice when it's not present, then it's probably a sign others do too. And maybe that's a calling, maybe, right? Like, oh, it feels bad when that's not present. Maybe I can bring some of that compassion or loving witness for somebody else. My best friend also had issues with one of his gigs. It's last week. It ends this week. And then also loss of position and pay cut. And that scared me because I thought, is this process doing this to him? And it scared me because I thought he's even more connected to this process than I am. And so I was very scared that if we bring in the death card, I mean, we both were kind of a little bit tentative about, I mean, he talked me into exploring, because I had guidance come in this morning. How about we just acknowledge and honor the death card, show it our respects, and move on to temperance. I told him that idea and we talked it out, because part of the reason I thought that is I thought he was feeling a fear. And I think we just both needed to kind of talk it out. So I did consider not spending a week with it. It's also, upon recording this, I'm recording this the evening of January 20th, 2020. So it's Martin Luther King Day today. I'll be posting it tomorrow. And so I thought maybe the timing is letting me know that this is the death card's rightful week and that I can move forward. So I thought maybe that was a synchronicity. But maybe again, it was a loss and a sacrifice, and maybe that was the symbolism of that great loss in our society, of a really inspiring, motivational change maker, and his legacy as well. That's fascinating, right? That's all coming up. And then my best friend also experienced a loss of connection in another friendship. And there was no explanation. So he's just assuming away, trying to make meaning from it. And so that's interesting. That's why I was thinking, like, it could be overlap, right? It could be overlap with the death card. Loss, sacrifice, loss of position, new perspective shift. All this stuff comes into play with the Hanged Man. But death can be endings of relationships, friendships, even life, right? But it's not as frequently, it doesn't as frequently carry that meaning, right? That physical death. I also had a friend and client bring up death in a session, talking about putting her relationship to her parents and their issues into perspective by considering the impermanence. And I do that too. I think that's a very healthy thing to do, to remind yourself of the impermanence. And so when you consider that and you're humbled by that impermanence, what shift does that make in the connection, right? What are the petty, trivial things that maybe won't mean much in the long term? And what are the battles worth fighting, right? So I think that's a very healthy perspective to take. And she also taught her children about the cycle of life when their pet goldfish died, which I thought was beautiful. I think that also helped me reconsider spending a week with the death card. And the conversation with my best friend about some endings are blessings, right? He was very insightful about this. He's a Pisces. He was talking about we could also have the death of poverty or depression, right? Or slavery. Those aren't scary. If we have the death of those things, that's actually progress. So maybe it would be disrespectful not to give a week to the death card. And then I tended to agree with that. We need endings too. So again, it was the gruesome stuff, the violent stuff I was scared about. Some other things that happened this week while I was considering medication for how dark things got. I'm telling you, no shame if you do, right? It's needed sometimes. There are certainly, cases where we need it either temporarily or we actually have that physiological impairment. I considered that maybe that's the case for me. And then I was open to making that choice. I was open to seeing my options again, which is an expanded place. So that's never a bad thing, right? It's part of the reason I went to the doctor. I want to explore my options here. And I want to get out of this cycle. So that's never a bad thing. But what ended up happening is I had a class to expand my knowledge base and skill set around internal family systems, which is a great modality founded by Richard Schwartz. And Dr. Richard Schwartz, a psychologist, I believe, psychiatrist. I don't know the difference in terms there, really. But I took a class with him in New York City around it. And it was just so profoundly healing. I saw all the potential there. And I could see how it can fill in the gaps for me working with clients, facilitating by phone, as family constellation can be very visual. And it's great for people who are visual in that sense too, because we're working with the subconscious and imagery outside of ourselves. But this system, we don't have to look at family dynamics, but it can assist in working with family dynamics, because oftentimes we internalize those voices and they become parts of us. So we can explore that stuff in us as well as we fragment our consciousness. And sorry, okay, you don't need all that explanation, Rachel. But anyway, so in this class, as we were exploring and pairing up, I was pairing up with licensed mental health practitioners, right? And so I was thinking, I'm not really afraid. I just assumed, okay, they're probably going to be more fluent than I, because hello, they have a license, right? And sometimes we make that carry a lot of weight. Not everyone was. A couple were certified in things. So as I was pairing up with people, they kept expressing jealousy at my ability to see visuals come in and be really in tune. And I would call it intuition, right? My inner guidance, my inner knowing. I've taken a lot of time to, in practice, working on refining those skills. And it reaffirmed my skill set, that I'm really in tune. Like, oh, that's right. That's a gift. That's a gift. And then I noticed that they were very tentative when working with me. They couldn't go with it. And I also realized they're probably not used to, I don't want to make assumptions, but what it seemed like was they weren't used to trusting the client. And I've taken a long time to learn to do that, because it's very difficult for someone to heal in your loving presence and witness if you see them as broken, right? And that they need you. I had to learn to come to take the approach of, this person is whole and they have their own inner guidance system, and I can facilitate for them. And sure, sometimes I've gone through things or learned things that can help put a perspective shift, right? Like the hanged man, maybe a perspective shift is needed, or information could fill in a gap here. But for the most part, I trust this person. I wouldn't work with them if I didn't, right? So I saw how that really helped the session, because then I could just be curious about what's going on for them. I could be curious about, and compassionate about, oh, his eyes are welling up. We're hitting on something here. Something's being released here. And not be afraid of anything that comes up, because I've gone there myself, right? I've gone through the dark times. And that also inspired me in that maybe there's a purpose in the dark times too, because I'm willing to go there with people. I'm not afraid of it. I faced it. I faced those really dark, heavy emotions that most people medicate their way out of, and I have too. It's not that I never do. Sometimes I need a break too, right? It's not like I want to live there. So sometimes I will medicate in unhealthier ways. But I've also faced things and confronted them and lived with them and been there with them. And I got up in front of the class for a demonstration at this IFS class and had an emotional release and talked about this part that felt too sensitive that people wanted me to ignore, right? I had a talk with my dad this week, and he was like, ignore that. Can't you just ignore it? I was like, no. That made me realize, in contrast, that helped me appreciate what I can do, because most people can't meet you there, right? Most people don't have that capacity. And that's why that's a strength. Most people might not have the skills to meet you and be with you in that space. That's called spiritual, or that's spiritual intimacy as well as emotional intimacy, right? Not everyone can do that. They can't go there with you. So they will show you signs of abandonment, right? By glazing over or changing the subject or walking away, or dismissal. Like, can't you just ignore it? Or, well, I have it bad too. You know what I mean? Instead of being there with you, acknowledging, allowing you to feel seen and heard. And then sure, maybe we can have a loving exchange. I can be there for you too, but not if I never feel seen or heard. So after the session, I felt expanded. I felt out of the dark place. I felt re-inspired. And I realized it was that community. It was that community that I was missing. So I plan to attempt to stay connected to these people. My cousin was actually in the class, and I've only seen her once since I've moved back into town. It's just, my family isn't that close. We have the tendency of not talking for a long time, but when we come back together, it's like nothing ever happened. We all kind of need a lot of space. And, but it was so good to see my cousin. So that was emotional. That was really moving. And we talked about my grandmother and my grandmother has passed away, and so experiencing life with my grandmother and then life after her passing. Anyone that comes into my life now will never know me as I was when my grandmother was here, or know my grandmother. So just to know people, or to be with somebody who knows history, is really valuable. So it made me value that, I really valued that. It was very good to see her. Even though there's been a lot of distance, not because we're fighting or anything, just that's the nature of my family. That's our patterning. That's part of what I'm trying to work on is, creating and establishing connections I don't need a break from, relationships I don't need to take space from, right? That don't weigh me down. And that includes relationship to location, where I'm living. So I'm problem solving there. I love a good investigation. Another thing that came up was Teal Swan. A video of hers came up called "What to Do If You're Suicidal." And I watched this video. Because if you've ever gone through a dark time, you know that comes up. Those thoughts come up. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. It does happen. I mean, that's something I've grappled with, my own mortality, right? Can I withstand this long-term experience? I've considered all perspectives there. And her video was very interesting about making peace with our impermanence in different ways. So that was also synchronous. She also did a video about parts recently, and I'm doing the internal family systems, which is all about getting to know our parts. So that was the long-winded version of the Hanged Man this week. That was my experience. Those were the synchronicities that came up for me. Again, I was considering kind of respectfully moving through, just passing on through the death card, because I felt like it came up so much and it was so intense. What I thought was the death card, that I considered not doing a week with it. I considered going right to temperance, filming 2 videos and giving you the option. If you want to work with the death card, you can. If not, come with me and we'll go to temperance. But I feel like I feel a reverence now that I talked to my best friend about it, that I talked to my client and she had this great outlook around it. And I read Alice's entry again, and because I was just like, what happened for her? Because she spent a day with each card and journaled her experiences. And for her, it was a renewed feeling of aliveness, reverence for life and its impermanence. And that I can roll with. I just was afraid of the intensity. So how about we move on? Please share in the description anything that came up for you in the Hanged Man week. Was it intense for you too? Congratulations on making it through. Moving on to death. Let's look at the history. Robert M. Place. I've also been fasting this week. It just came up for me to fast. I don't know why. Oh, sacrifice. Okay, got it. Hanged Man is about sacrifice. Hello. Takes me a minute, sorry. A little slow in the processor. So the Hanged Man symbolizes a sacrifice for a greater cause, a greater good, right? At times. Fasting can be one of those things. If you're seeking mental clarity or experiencing, inflammation or whatever, you want to reset, a renewal. Sometimes, strategic fasting can be beneficial. And so it came up for me this week to do that. And I feel clearer. I feel good about that. Okay. Now we can do it. That was a slow ending to the Hangman week. Let's look at the history of the Death card. So although the fourth figure is absent on the Marseille Wheel of Fortune, the end of life and of the domain of fate is still implied. It therefore should be no surprise that the Hanged Man is trumped by death. The mystic ultimately seeks the secret of immortality. He wishes in turn to trump death. We should therefore welcome this next trump as a sign that we are nearing our goal. The image of death in the Tarot has consistently been the skeletal figure known as the Grim Reaper. In the earliest cards, he is standing or riding on a pale horse, a reference to death as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse found in Revelation. His weapon of choice is the scythe, though in the Visconti Sforza deck he uses a bow and arrow. This image of death, developed in the mid-13th century in France, was made popular by the Dance of Death, an allegorical dance or work of art in which death is seen to triumph over individuals of every age and class. This is that artwork. If you notice it, I'll show it again because I think he says some more about it here. Similarly, in the Tarot of Marseille, the Grim Reaper is depicted harvesting the heads and arms of both men and women of both noble and common status. Figure 35, which is the image I showed you, is from a series of woodcuts illustrating the Dance of Death by the famous German Renaissance artist Hans Holbein the Younger, 1497 to 1543. This woodcut illustrates the triumph of death over a hermit, just as death trumps the hermit in the Tarot. Also, as in the Tarot's allegory, the last image in Holbein's book is one that depicts the soul's transcendence of death. So again, this is the Dance of Death, the hermit there being trumped by the Death card, or the figure of death, right? Just as we have seen the folly in chasing after worldly gain and have developed our strength to overcome that impulse, our strength has been trumped by suffering and now by death. If this were a pessimistic tale, it would end here. In all the known early orders of the trumps, death is always numbered 13. As 13 is a number associated with bad luck and death, this suggests that death was given this number for symbolic reasons. It also shows that this is not a story that ends with death. Death is always in the second act of the story, not in the last. It is not even the final trump in the second act. It is always a story about the mystic goal, the transcendence of death, the hero's search for immortality. That's the history of the Death card. So let's move on to the Waite Smith symbolism. And this is the 13th card in the major arcana. Death is fittingly linked to Scorpio, zodiac sign, the astrological sign associated with death and rebirth. The corpse in black armor riding a pale horse is related to the image in Revelation. A king, a bishop, and a woman and a child all fall prey to him. None are immune, yet death is holding a flag emblazoned with the white rose. The golden dawn, symbol of rebirth. In the distance, a ship, a symbol of the afterlife, sails toward a sun rising between two towers. Sorry if it won't focus. There are the two towers with the sun. The new dawn. Can you see the sun between the towers? There we go. The new dawn. Here, the towers are the equivalent of the twin pillars. This is the logical conclusion to the ritual of the hanged man. Death is not the end, but a new beginning. He represents the passing of the old, the natural end of a situation, and the dawn of a new opportunity. All things end, but the cycles of the world teach us that all endings are followed by renewal. Beautiful. So if we got the death card in a reading and some additional information, right, for divination, because oftentimes it's the divination, not the history or the symbolism. Well, the symbolism is associated with the divination, but that's what shows up in the week, right? That's what I'm finding. I always go back and reference the divination because there's a lot of explanation there for me about what's happening. The history is very interesting to me too. It's just when we talk about the week and what we're going to experience, it's mostly the symbolism or the divination. So Scorpio, right? It could be a Scorpio person or under the sign of Scorpio. Transformation, rebirth, end of a cycle, endings. And just as I wrote that, my pen ran out of ink. It actually ran out of ink twice. I don't know if you can see that. So I had to change pen colors a couple of times. Letting go, metamorphosis. And then again, my pen ran out of ink, so I had to change pens twice. So there was already synchronicity in that. So again, just to repeat, so it's all in a flow. Scorpio, the sign of Scorpio, zodiac sign, transformation, rebirth, end of a cycle, endings, metamorphosis, letting go. And then Alice B. Grist's intuitive meaning. Outside of the obviousness of literal death, this is a card of closure and opening. When one life ends, those that are left begin again. When one situation ceases, a new one replaces it. When there is darkness, soon there will be light. Death is unavoidable. We meet it every day, and it brings great gifts, whilst endings can be sorrowful. And death can fill us with dread. It certainly did. The certainty is that life follows. If we apply this to all deaths, then we might know that as spirit, we don't die, we transform. Somewhere out there, our beloveds are exulting in a fresh state, just as we, in their absence, revisit life in a new way. And then more information can mean end, mortality, destruction, corruption. Unlikely that this card actually represents a physical death. Typically, it implies an end, possibly of a relationship or interest, and therefore implies an increased sense of self-awareness. I love self-awareness. I'm open to more of that. Endings, severe illness, profound change, letting go of attachments, failure, mortality, change, transition. Highly feared card, but can be one of the most positive. After a period of pause with Hanged Man, death symbolizes the end of a major phase or aspect of your life that is no longer serving you, opening you to the more valuable and essential possibilities. Embrace them. We don't need to be afraid of death. The death card this week. That's good to know. I think the worst is behind me. And you. Are you having these experiences? Hanged Man week was rough. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect it to be so dark because his head looked so illuminated. But I already feel more alive as we usher in the death card. And it's amazing how the connection to these cards is enhancing with each week that we work. That's my experience anyway. Let's do a brief sound meditation with Frosted Crystal Singing Bowl as we integrate the lessons we ushered in with the Hanged Man, say goodbye and bring in the death card, ushering in experiences and synchronicities around the death card and that meaning. Ending things that no longer serve, right? And new beginnings in renewal, state of renewal, rebirth. So go ahead and close your eyes. Get in touch with your breath. Focusing on that experience with the Hanged Man card as we integrate and release. Bringing in the death card and all the meaning, the richness, the meaning, the symbols. Beautiful. Slowly coming back to the room. So, thank you for liking the video so I know you're following along and subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate that. My next goal is 1,000. Also, I'll be reading at a Tarot Expo event in Burbank, California, March 21st and 22nd. I'm going to put that information in the description of this video. I would love to see you there. And again, Amazon store with the products will be in the description. Personal readings and sessions, information about me, their social media platforms, all that'll be in the description of this video. I'm wishing you a beautiful week of renewal, new beginnings, and new possibilities. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, Empath.